No, I'm not. But I don't have a red road, so
Yeah.
yeah, I can do that for you.
We just forward it to me.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I'll call him. I just don't have it readily at my fingertips,
Oh.
and so I don't call him and say, walk me through how to reinstall this.
Oh,
please."
yes. Yeah, I can send it your way.
Thank you. So I was just thinking, who has that on the top of their head?
I need enough help, but.
All right.
Somebody, one of them.
Hello.
It's probably Michael. I don't know if that's. That's probably not my way here for you. Sure. What do you think? To any of the ones.
You want me to send it to your personal or your?
Work one's fine.
So,
Yeah, it's just for some reason, it doesn't let me into global anymore.
Oh.
So I can't just look him up and call and say, I need help on this.
yeah, I just sent it to that one.
Okay. And then I'll ask him how to get me back on board. So I
Yeah,
don't
he can help
ask
you
for
with
his number next time.
Yeah.
Makes it easier when I just call him.
Say, walk me through all this.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's good.
Push to try.
It's not gonna be best.
It's not what I do every day.
Yeah.
Let's have the
Sean's
specialist.
a specialist there.
Yeah. And there was somebody else, but I can't remember. Sorry. Let's start at the beginning. If he has to toss me off, that's fine. I'll put my list in my head of all the bookings. All right, we will welcome you to this afternoon and call to order the study meeting for the West Valley City Council. It is February 7th, 2023. It is 4:30 p.m. and we are meeting in the multipurpose room of West Valley City Hall. We have all members of the council present except Councilman Hoon. And he'll probably be joining us later. We have Councilman Christensen joining us virtually, and in person we have Councilman Norfelt, Councilman Fitzsimmonu, Councilman Whetstone, Councilman Harmon, and myself. And we're joined at the table with Mr. Pyle, our city manager, and Ms. Kamick, our city recorder. Before we start with the actual meeting, I'd like to, on behalf of the staff and the council, give our condolences to Will. His mom has passed away this weekend. And just know that our thoughts are with you. Thank you. Okay, we'll now go to our minutes of January 24th, 2023 and January 31st, 2023. Turn it to the council for discussion or a motion.
I move for approval of both sets of minutes.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. And those pass. We'll now review for tonight. Did we have any changes?
Only one update, ma'am, and that was
Okay.
on the Utopia thing. So I got in touch with the Utopia leadership and they did confirm that they would honor the $42,050 a month. Did turn out that there was
A month?
some,
Month?
42,000 a month?
oh, I'm sorry, 42,000.
$50, okay,
Is that what I said? Yeah.
42, and it all came out at once.
Right, sorry,
$42,050 a month.
capital connection,
Okay.
right, yeah, that $50 a month for the. I
Okay,
probably blurred it all together because I was moving on to the next little piece of information, which was, turns out that there probably was some miscommunication at the staff levels when we went back and trying to get a lower price. They offered the $50 a month, but they needed more than the 42 for recovering their capital costs. They're gonna honor the $50 a month anyway, but just thought I would let you know that was kind of the settling out of that discussion.
okay. And then we'll approve that down below. Okay. And is that it?
Yes, ma'am.
That's the only thing? Okay, did anybody else have questions on tonight's agenda? Okay, is Don still on?
Doesn't look like it.
Awesome.
Looks like
Okay,
we lost
we
it.
lost him, so we lost Councilman Christensen. All right, so we're there. Now we have our communications. So I am assuming that we're not having a regular meeting next week because we have no action items this week, right?
Correct.
Okay. So everybody understand that one. Okay, we'll take Mr. Schertz with our legislative update.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Thanks for the opportunity to speak again today. Things are moving and grooving up there on Capitol Hill. There's a lot going on. We're now halfway through the legislative session. Appropriations committees are finalizing their work this week. So business and labor, which is where most of the economic development incentive work is being done, successfully presented their budget today. Natural resources finishes tomorrow, and then social services finished on Monday as well. So everything's moving very, very quickly on the appropriations front. For Nancy and some of the crew in the back there, I think there will be a ton of opportunities this year for additional resources on many of our economic development goals, as well as our parks and recs goals as well. There's a pretty considerable amount of new money going into the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, which oversees many of our parks and recs grants that we apply for here at West Valley City. So they're looking at putting an additional $14 million into that grant pool with a new cap on some of those grants up to $1 million, where historically they've been capped at $500,000. So that'll give us a ton of opportunity on some of those things that we've been working on through that committee. Next step on appropriations is all of the recommendations that are being made by the subcommittees will now go to leadership, which is called the Executive Appropriations Committee. That committee will start meeting middle of the week next week, where they'll take the prioritized list from all the subcommittees and then start culling through that budget. Just to give you some perspective, with a $3 billion surplus, they have about $10 billion worth of asks coming through the various committees. So there is a little bit of a culling process that has to occur that leadership kind of takes from this point forward. So that's it on the appropriations front, and something that we're watching very closely for many of the programs that we're working on. In addition to appropriations, a couple of bills or issues of note. First and foremost, I know it's near and dear to our hearts, is how we handle homeless services. In the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity line item requests that were submitted today, there was an additional $2.5 million that was put into the Homeless Resource Fund, which is important to us in that a condition of that was that we would keep the caps in place on what other communities pay into that fund. So we're still successfully working with Wayne Niederhauser on that front to make sure that West Valley City doesn't have any additional financial exposure when it comes to paying into the homeless resource account that goes to the mitigation account for those communities that do host a shelter. We haven't seen any additional language on where we're going to be citing temporary shelters. I think we've talked in previous meetings that there is some conversations taking place on how we want to handle those issues. We've not seen any specific legislation on what that's going to look like at that point. There are two communities in Salt Lake County who have voluntarily said that they would be willing to take that shelter. That's Sandy City and Mill Creek. So I know Wayne Niederhauser is actively working with those two communities, which is also good news for us because that reduces the need for them to look into other communities as to where additional shelter resources would be going. So that's kind of where we're sitting on homeless resource centers and issues of that nature. One of the other issues we're working on is justice court modifications. There have been two bills that have come forward on justice court modifications. Thanks to the West Valley team and Eric and his team, we have successfully negotiated those bills to make sure that we limit the impact to West Valley City, still maintaining administrative control over our justice court, which was being contemplated in one bill of actually moving that control to the administrative office of the courts. We successfully got that language pulled out of the bill. And then the second bill, which looks really at kind of how we retool the whole justice court system. They've largely pulled most of that language out of the bill. There's still some technical cleanups on what the court system ultimately will look like. But as it relates to justice courts, they pulled most of the language that was at least being contemplated in the interim out of those bills, allowing local governments to maintain control and oversight of their justice court. So the investments that we've made in West Valley City as it relates to our own justice court continue to kind of take center stage. In fact, myself, Wayne, and Nicole met with the Utah League of Cities and Towns today, had a very fruitful conversation about many of the programs we're running out of our justice court that are extremely valuable in this community, including our mental health court and drug court and other programs. And I think that information is kind of getting to the end of the row, if you will, in regards to making sure that if they do take any action on justice courts, that they do contemplate kind of the uniqueness in the situation that we sit in as West Valley City, that we're probably not a very good comparison to other justice courts throughout the state based on the program that we do in our justice court. Last piece that I'll chat about and then turn it over to any questions is have been working with the police department on additional resources to allow for photo radar enforcement on some of our major corridors. Senator Jerry Stevenson does have a bill that he's included much of the infrastructure that we'd had some concern with, primarily Mountain View Corridor, as well as Bangerter Highway, that would allow us as well as the Department of Public Safety to use radar enforcement on those facilities. There are some questions on how the funds would be used. If you were to ticket someone using photo enforcement, what sort of warning systems we need to put in place, what sort of signage needs to be put in place. So we're still working through those details, but the general concept that we would be able to use photo radar enforcement on those major facilities is something that continues to be pursued by Senator Stevenson. In addition to that, there's two other bills that allow for enhanced license plate reader technology to be used by police departments in pursuit of missing persons, lost or stolen vehicles, or active crime investigations. Again, this is just kind of that slow march toward allowing technology to aid us in our police services that we're offering in our community. And those bills are moving forward as well. One in particular is already passed out of the House and is in the Senate for consideration that would enhance that availability of resources as well. Lots of stuff coming on land use. All the big land use bills are really just starting to drop. Two bills dealing with subdivisions that we've been working with Steve Pastrick and his team on just hit yesterday. So we're working through those details, getting feedback and coordinating those efforts with the League of Cities and Towns as well to make sure that the processes that we have in place in West Valley City continue to maintain in effect, even though there are going to be some administrative changes at the legislative level as to how we handle subdivision approvals and things of that nature. The one thing that we have talked about among this group as well is our moderate income housing plan. The bill which details out how we have to comply with the moderate income housing reporting requirements also dropped yesterday. We're looking through that bill as well, but we did get two major provisions included in that bill, which gives you an administrative recourse process if you do not comply initially, that you have an administrative ability to remedy any sort of defaults in your application. And then if you do think that you've complied and for whatever reason, the Department of Workforce Services thinks you haven't, there's actually an administrative appeals process that you can appeal that ruling through DWS as well. So I think we've got that generally covered in terms of our moderate income housing plan. I've been working with Nicole and the team also about exempting communities on kind of future looking moderate income housing strategies, recognizing that West Valley City is largely built out. And we certainly have our fair share of moderate income housing. Continuing to kind of anticipate additional moderate income housing probably isn't the right approach for West Valley City. So we're trying to put some of those provisions in the bill as well. And are just looking over that bill as it came out yesterday. With that, Madam Mayor, happy to answer any questions you may have or members of the council.
Does anyone have questions? I had one. So the stoplight cameras will not be able to be used on 56th, 35th, only on.
At this point, we're trying to navigate the politics.
Okay.
What the state has said at this point and what we've at least gotten some of the legislators who've expressed concern candidly about the technology in general have said, let's use it on major corridors, see how that works. Once we get through major corridors, we can go look at additional road systems that we can include on that. But at this point in West Valley City, the bill includes Mountain View Corridor and Bangerter Highway.
So is there any talk about who's going to enforce on those two? Are we going to turn it over to the HP or? I know a lot of the West Side mayors are saying we don't have the police force to control speeding and everything else on these two major highways.
There is a separate piece of legislation specific to Mountain View Corridor and to Bangerter Highway that says that would be the jurisdiction of the Highway Patrol and they would do enforcement on those facilities. That would be in addition to anything that we decide to do as well. But that's certainly another concept as well, is that they would have that.
But that one hasn't moved forward or.
That one has not yet moved forward.
Okay. Okay, seeing none others. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mayor.
Well, it looks like Mr. Christensen's back on with us, so we're good there. All right, we'll now turn the time over to Mr. Pyle and Mr. Bunderson for the presentation of form of government.
Thank you, ma'am. So Mr. Bunderson's going to start. Kind of the way we approached this was to make a description of what the current form of government law is at the state, how change would occur, what the process is for that. And then also Mr. Bunderson's going to handle that. And then I would pick up the conversation on the other requested part of that, which was pros and cons of form.
Okay.
So, Eric?
All right, thank you. We've got a little infographic here. I will share it. Councilman Christensen, will you let us know if you're able to, if you can see the screen? Okay, well, obviously we'll be able to distribute this around after. So the process that I'm going to show you here is the way the council can change the form of government. There's another way that the citizens could do it by initiative, but I figured you didn't really want to know that because but it basically works the same way. So the real work of changing the form of government is the decision that the council has to make as to what kind of government to change to. So the current state law gives you 4 options, again, which Mr. Powell will talk about. There's a council mayor with 5 members. And that's the strong mayor with the mayor as the executive. Council mayor with 7 council members, 6-member council and 5-member councils, which are sort of more modern versions of our form of government, but a little more plug and play, if you will. So the key dates to remember for this year are August 23rd, 2023, and then the election date. The same analysis would apply next year, and I'll kind of tell you why, but essentially whatever resolution change happens has to be done by August 23rd of 2023. Then within 45 days of that resolution, there has to be 2 public hearings. And then I don't have it in the infographic, but the council can withdraw that resolution within 60 days. But after that, the die is cast and it goes to a vote of the people. And that vote would be on November 7th of 2023. Now, if the people who are voting say no, the city would have to wait 4 more years. I have that down at the bottom here till 2027 in order to hold the vote again. If they vote yes, this is where it gets kind of funky. The districts that and the mayoral position that end in, okay, sorry, let me back up a little. So if the people vote yes to change the form of government, then that new government is elected in 2025. Okay, the municipal year 2025. So in 2025, as you can see from my chart, the mayor, District 2, District 4, and at-large 2 are already running again. So they would be running for this new government position, right? Whatever it is. District 1, District 3, and at-large 1 would have basically one of 2 things happen. If the council could figure out a form of government that tracks those same districts, then those people could stay on District 1, District 3, and at-large 1 until 2027. Okay, so if you're elected this year and the new form of government has, let's say, the same District 1, then you could stay on until 2027 at your choice. You could also choose to leave at 2025. I'm going to stop there for a second. Does that make sense to everybody? If the new form of government does not track those same districts, then those districts would lose their position as of that election day in 2025. They would still get paid for those last 2 years under the statute, but they would no longer be council members. That's sort of scenario 1. Scenario 2, if it's an entirely different form of government, and let's say you decide a 6-member council all at large, for example. None of those are going to track with our current government. So on the election day of 2025, a whole new government would be voted into place. And here's where it gets really funky. The law says that half those positions, by roll of dice, essentially by drawing of lot, would have 2-year terms and half would have 4-year terms. So we have the deck of cards from the from the time before. And so I suppose those could be used. So that's
Until it's set and then everybody would be on a 4-year.
correct. Yeah, and then you get back on track. And I didn't want to confuse everybody because I kind of confused myself a couple times. But obviously the election years is what I'm talking about. So the new government would actually be January of 2026, right? And so any questions about the process? There's a whole bunch of other details, a whole bunch of requirements about the resolution, but I wanted to give you kind of the big.
So is it, I'm just trying to understand, is it, so if we have a resolution in 2023,
Mhm.
it specifies that we have a new government voted on in 2025.
It specifies the type of government that you want to change to and whether or not the voters of the city
Okay.
say yes or no.
But if they say yes or no, I mean, do we put in the resolution when we want to change, or is that set
That's set. Yeah, that's set.
by our choice to have it be a resolution?
Yep, that's set. It has to, the new government has to be elected the next municipal election, which is 2027. Now, this also applies to 2024. This could also happen in 2024 and the election would be in 2025 again. Because again, it's just the next municipal election.
Oh, Eric, can I have a question?
Sure.
Yeah. Another scenario we can do, I don't know, to copy our neighbor, West Jordan.
Mhm.
They add on top of that, we have 2 at large right now, okay?
Mhm.
Lots and dot.
Mhm.
So we add 1 more at large. Okay, so we still have District 1, District 2, District 3, District 4, and 3 at large.
Mhm.
Okay, so that fair, is that right?
I-
Yeah, that's how they did.
Yeah, I think that's one of the that's one of the very few scenarios that I think you could hold on to these same positions. You have to,
So that you won't interrupt anything, any council member here.
Yep.
Basically.
yep, I think that is probably the one scenario that would be the case.
Okay, so that we won't mess up anybody. Okay, if that passed for the year 2023, okay, if the citizens say, well, yes, I want to go with this direction,
Mhm.
a council mayor, form of government, and I do want to repeat again, make sure I understand, you know what I'm saying?
yeah.
Okay, and then up to January 2026 will be affected,
Mhm.
correct?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yep. The new government gets voted in 2025.
right, voted in 2025.
Mhm.
Okay, so 23 citizens say yes or no.
Correct.
If yes, they can move forward for 25 and effective with January 26.
That's right. It took you a lot faster than it took me. I mean,
Oh,
you're much quicker.
so we added 1 more at large. It won't interrupt anybody.
That is one of the options.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions about that? Like I said, whole bunch of devil in the details, but that's sort of the big picture. Okay. Wayne, do you want me to leave the,
Yeah,
That
please,
part on?
would you bring up the other one for me and just kind of look the slides for me if I ask? Pro con. Is that what you were asking me?
no, I just this thing.
Huh?
The little thing here. Do you want that slide?
No. I want to go to the pros cons.
Can you send us that though?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's on the.
Oh, did it get uploaded?
Yeah, it's all in the packet.
Oh, is the pro con uploaded too? Oh, sorry, I was confused. Okay, yeah, hang on 1 second, I'll get it.
Stop it here.
And I will go through.
There's a third attachment, by the way, to that, which I'm not going to go over. It was just an article that talks about council manager form and kind of its origin and what it's done across the 100 years until it got to 2005. So I'm not going to go over that, just so you're aware. Eric, if you'll go to slide 2, please. So really the only reason this slide is in there is I just wanted to make sure that as I'm talking about the pros and the cons, I'm not going to try to go through the 4 different versions like Eric was describing, the 5 and the 6, or 5 and 6 member for mayor council, 5 and 6 mayor for the council form. It's important to mention them though, because there are a lot of little permutations on how and whether you would take this decision or that decision about the administration. So for simplicity's sake in the discussion, I'm going to limit the pros and the cons to the discussions about mayor council or the manager counselor or council manager, or what in state statute is now called simply council form. So would you go to slide 3? Okay, so this slide really, you could probably have the whole conversation just on this slide and we could end it at that. But really, your choice as a elected body, as a city, about which form you would rather have is really about policy and how you want policy arrived at. So in the council manager form, the council and the mayor are part as the same policy making body. And then as we are in our current form of government, the city manager administers the policy via the operations, runs the day-to-day operations of the city. Whereas in the council mayor form, you have the council setting the policy legislatively by budget and ordinance. And in almost all of the forms under Utah State, the mayor doesn't participate in that except potentially in a tie-breaking format in a couple of them, right? Or policy is also set sort of in the mayor on the administrative end as that person is both in charge of implementing operations and then also ends up being the focus a lot of time of policy questions. So they do that through that format. A good example of that I was thinking of from recent years is about a year ago maybe 2 years ago it was, when mayor in Salt Lake brought out this concept of the tiny home village in dealing with the overall issue of homelessness. So the mayor came out and said, hey, we'd like to put together this tiny home village. It's going to help us in these various ways in addressing homelessness. And we're going to take it back to the council and then we're going to work that through the system. And then what she's done in that meantime is taken that concept back to the council. They've gone through a zoning, planning and zoning process. I think they had to change their zoning, had to come up with some budgetary allocation for it, that sort of thing. So that's an example of how the mayor and council would come to a policy direction or implementation in that setting. Okay, Eric, if you go to the next form or next slide. So this was the council manager form advantages. I was asked for the pros, cons, and I did 4 slides here, one for advantages, disadvantages, council manager, and one for advantages, disadvantages, council mayor. And just sort of possibly humorously joking a little bit about it. Obviously, this one's a little easier for me since this has been our form for many, many years. And so we've seen a lot of experience along that way. But these are also all commonly addressed advantages in the council manager form if you go out and look at the literature out there and say. So first of all, from just an effectiveness standpoint, your CEO or CAO, as it's defined, is usually going to be professionally trained, have a MPA, maybe an MBA, some sort of a training level that way at a higher education level. They also are usually going to have a lot of experience in that form, either growing up through the ranks, sort of like I did as an assistant city manager first, or other methods through other departments. There have been other tracks into city management from the various departmental functions, whether that's finance, whether that's I've seen police chiefs become city managers later on, that sort of thing. But the point is that usually because they have more experience, they have more training, they're going to be more effective. You also have usually the added benefit that the staffs working for the city manager are typically longer tenured. They're also trained professionally and experienced, and then therefore the policies better executed in that environment. Stability is an advantage from the standpoint in that The council and the mayor are united organizationally in the statute, more able to formulate long-standing policies. So an example of this I would use is, I use the wording influences the personality of the city. So let's use Fairborn development or development generally as an example of this. You have a vision that's been put in place by the council. You have 10-year experience and staff that have been around long enough to be able to implement that. Whereas in a mayor council form, because you have more turnover both at the elected and the staff level, might not be as stable and therefore effective that way. Politically representative, the council and the mayor as equal representatives or equal members represent the electorate together. And then the manager implements that dynamic. Cost, this is an interesting one and fairly obvious. I think we've seen this here when you compare it to other forms or other cities. But basically the function here or the impetus here is that it's just more naturally limiting. And I'll use as a quick example, when you have a mayor council form, a lot of times you're going to move down the path across the years. Council will ask for duplicating staff on both, whether it's administrative staff, whether it's advisory staff, whether it's legal staff, that sort of thing. So eventually over time, there's a tendency in the mayor council form to be more expensive. Okay, next slide, Eric. So a couple of disadvantages on the council manager form. Sometimes citizens, and not just citizens, but outside elected officials, other external organizations might be confused as to who's appropriate to work with for given needs, initiatives, that sort of thing. So we kind of go through this repeated education process as we go along in the years with council manager form. Or perception, a common suggested disadvantage is that the manager may have too much control of the reins of the city. Personally, I believe this is an unfounded fear based on the structure of the form from a clear delineation of what the form is supposed to be structured like. The council sets the policy, they're within that clear set, and they have those reins and they direct all that policy. A good example of that is the conversation we were having last week on code enforcement. And then the manager has checks and balances on him to make sure that those, in my case, him or her, to make sure that those policies are carried out. Next slide. Mayor council form, and then I've got this on both these two, the reverse disadvantages and advantages on both the slides. I just didn't go over them again. But a couple of other advantages of the mayor council form. It's from a traditional standpoint, the citizenry expects or is more familiar with that direct relationship with the elected mayor and has that consideration. And also sort of externally, again, regionally, peer-to-peer relationships are facilitated by that mayor, could be with developers, could be with other mayors, could be other external organizations I mentioned or haven't mentioned as well, but that's a couple of other advantages of that form. And then the last slide, Eric. Again, the reverse of the other advantages, disadvantages, and then policy accountability. So when the mayor leads the executive branch of municipality, and this goes back to the chart that I put up there. The mayor can become the focus of the policy discussion outside of the council's discussion. You see this a lot. And again, it's kind of just a naturally progressing thing. When the media wants to contact the city, who they call the mayor. If a developer wants to establish a relationship with the city, they can go to the council members also individually, but a lot of times they will go to the mayor first. And then there's potentially, not always, some difficulty in participating or steering that policy discussion. Also, from that accountability standpoint, manager can always be terminated by the council, whereas the mayor leaves by changes in election years. So it's just harder. One just closing comment to the whole pros and cons discussion is that either form can work or not work, depending on what's going on from an environment standpoint. You can have bad managers, you can have very functional and expert mayors. So there's no exclusion. It's really kind of more of a what's more likely from the pros and cons standpoint of either the general forms, and then of course, like I said, various forms that are allowed under Utah State would have some minor variations to that theme as well. So that's kind of a succinct outline of what the pros and cons are. And thanks, Eric, for that process. And with that, I'll leave it to you.
Okay. Did any of the council have any questions?
But the reason I brought this up and asked, I was expecting communication, but appreciate the presentation. But as I look at citizens and their comments to me, form of government ends up being maybe in the top 10 that they talk to me about, they're concerned with, but it's probably top 2 as far as their passion and their importance of it. So, so that's why I wanted to bring it up, and I can see the benefits of both. And
I was hoping to get some information on the rationale for removing this form of government from a state recognized form of government.
Back when.
Yeah.
Eric and Nicole will probably have just as good as memory as I do, but broadly, there was a dispute within one of the cities here in Salt Lake Valley between the council and the mayor as to the form that they had at the time. And honestly, I can't even remember which form they had, but that led to a larger legislative discussion. And then legislature felt like the result of that conversation and the legislation that they came was reforming, so to speak, the options. And that happened, when was that, Nicole? 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah, I'd say at least 15 years ago. I could get the exact year.
I was gonna say, do you want the time period so you can look up articles and
Yeah, I
why?
guess I was just wondering about, you know,
Yeah,
is
we
there
can get
something
that for you, for
inherent
sure.
about this form that everyone was just like, no, we just need to get rid of it.
Yeah, no, and it wasn't just this form either, right? There were a number of forms that were changed or eliminated at the same time.
Right, the bill ended up being a cleanup bill overall, and form of government is a common topic at the legislature. And so at that time, it was particular to one jurisdiction that was having some significant trouble, but they did a whole kind of a cleanup all the way around, not even specific to this form. But yeah, I can get the history for you. There'll be legislative history as well. Happy to provide that for you.
Sure, thank you.
and then how many cities have our form of government versus other forms of government? I think West Jordan just changed. I think, is that right?
Yes.
A couple of years ago. I don't know any others. I've really only experienced this, and then I've worked with the city council in Tooele and they're a mayor council. I worked with them for some other stuff, some housing stuff, but part of me feels like we ought to let the citizens have an option every once in a while and see what they want.
And has there been a vote since we formed this form of government when it was first
No.
established?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Okay, any other? Oh,
I saw in some research that there's not very many cities in Utah that have this, form, but nationally, more than half of the cities have a council manager.
Wait,
And it's been growing nationally, the council manager, form, especially for cities more than 10,000 people.
thank you. Wayne, to be honest with you, I'm very frank. You brought up very honest and very frank for this information, to be honest with you.
Sorry. what
Yeah,
was that, sir?
you brought this information very honest, upfront. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, cause I look it up a little bit. I'm not hiding you. I look it up a little bit, and talk to people here and there. To be honest with you, the reason because you know that I grew up in Vietnam. I was born and grew up in Vietnam, and I saw many government officials. They were abusing their power. I came over here when I was like 21. So I knew a lot. I saw a lot in Vietnam. They abuse in their powers, and sometimes they were putting people in jail with no reason. Yeah, and I'm really sad. I'm really sad because you have one government system like that. Is that mean they control everything and they can do whatever they want, and that's very concerning when I grew up in Vietnam. And when I came over here, check and balance. One of my perfect things. I mean, what my idea about that, that's a totally is a totally different than in Vietnam. Checks and balance. It just, you can have someone here make some mistake and other can help them out. I mean, like council and mayor, they work together. So I think that's a great. To be honest with you, just like Scott said, to give the citizen a chance to do this, because the people, they're confused, like Bashar, that the guy, Kelly Bashar. He came here and said, well, I don't know who can I talk to. Can I talk to the city manager? Can I talk to the mayor? I can talk to you guys. Which one in charge here? You know what I'm saying? That's confused people sometimes. Also, as a city manager, it's not really not the accountability, basically not accountable to the public. When something happened in this city, basically the mayor, accountable for that, because the city, I wouldn't blame the city manager. Because why? Because we hire him to come over here to take care of the city hall. Stuff in the city is not for the political leader or something here. No, that's not his job. Policing, like Mayor Lan, I give her publicly tonight, is she have been doing a wonderful job, outstanding job. Because I talked to a number of mayors, and she said, well, Mayor Lan, see the part-time job, but she's everywhere. Yeah, she's everywhere. She part-time job, she's everywhere. She should be like a full-time job, full-time mayor, you know what I'm saying? Here the thing is, when the mayor appoints someone and it's council, we don't like it, we can, reject, we can deny that. So that means working out very well with the check and balance. For example, one thing that's scaring me, I told you before, we're not not long ago, maybe a month ago, I saw you in the gym and we talked a bit. That scared me the most. If the city attorney, one time the city attorney said, well, I'm not working for you guys, I'm working for Wayne. And when I said, I said that, I said, my goodness, man, to the point, I didn't realize this. In this, the council mayor is very unique. They sat down, like all the cities here, they sat down, they work out with the city attorney, and the mayor will appoint, and the council agree. So both of them work together. And the city attorney can be employment for the city or can be a contract for the city. Some city here, for example, like city West Jordan is employment, but like city like Taylorsville is a contract. Okay, so they can they can represent the council, they can represent the mayor. When something happens, they can read okay. You know what I'm saying? But now we have to go out and hire someone, have to go through with the channel, go this Eric Bunderson, and that's really concerned me too. So that happened, and you can license contract or you can do employment, and they can represent for both. And I think that's beautiful. I think I like that one. Something can be check and balance. About the cost, you mentioned about cost, depend, like you said, depend. For example, like Sandy, she came in and she create her own bunker. So she has her own secretary, attorney, and everything. And the council, they have to do the same thing, different bunker. So basically they fire back and forth, and it costs so much money. But generally speaking, in this valley, like West Valley City and other cities, the mainland here, she came from a council group West Jordan, Taylorsville, Murray, South Salt Lake, and other places. So they have a kind of like a unique, basically a community, they work together, they know how to work with council. So that the more openness, the less they spend. For example, like Kenland, the mainland again, I'm sorry, Ken, mainland again. She said, I will send out all the email to you guys. Okay, you don't have to do no action, just look at email and see what's going on. And I think that's that's how we do openness, less expensive. And everything is gonna be on the table. And sometimes, like other cities, just 2 cities here is a big problem. It's Sandy, not a big problem, but they just not very open, they did do by themselves and they keep very much under the table and it causes a problem. But most cities, they're doing very well with the, generally speaking, they on the table, the cost is not that much. But the most important thing here when the check and balance. The check and balance. That's the most important thing. And I would love to see that. Just like Scott, like it, try it out and see how people they test the water. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Just a comment, just on what I've been reading a little bit about the differences between both, and I recognize a lot of the points that you brought up, but it does seem like from what I've been able to gather that the council manager form of government is more of an efficient type of government. For the reasons you brought up, you have trained professionals in public administration and also the tenure they're here for. They understand more of the history of the city and have more of a context that way. Where I pause at is, and this has been brought up in multiple articles that I've read about, is it's more of when residents, members of a community have the ability to elect who their leader is, that can be found under the mayor council form of government, and you lose that representation if you have the council members. So, the most efficient type of government, I'm not saying we have that here, but is a dictatorship, and people don't elect who their leader is, and the dictator just makes decisions. But that when people have the ability to elect, they know who their leader is, they understand, if I'm paying taxes, I get to elect who my leader is of my community. It doesn't have that feel in the current form.
Also, over here, like city manager, if he has a higher pay, they can move somewhere. For example, like when he was planning to move to Missouri somewhere like a few years ago, but he decided not to do that. So, and he want to stay back here with the city, West Valley City. So, training is good. I agree with you about that. But at the same time, when they somewhere pay a higher job, they can move somewhere. But I also agree with you about the leadership. The mayor is living this valley in this city, and they know things going on in the city, and public first basically they can respond to the people in the city, so making them quicker.
Okay, anyone else? All right, thank you. I'm going to ask for permission to move one agenda item. Mr. Pastrix, would anybody be opposed? Tell me how I have to do it to move that up. We have someone waiting for that one. Mr. Reynolds-Bacher is here, and I appreciate him coming and his interest. And so this one kind of went more than the 20 minutes. So the next one's supposed to be even longer. Anybody have opposed to that? Okay. Mr. Pastrick is in person. Would you come do this one for us, please?
Thank you, Mayor. So you recall, it was just a few weeks ago, Mr. Brad Reynolds came to the public comment period, and he's here today, but had made a request to amend a development agreement for a townhome project. And that project, just for reference, it's a 33 unit townhome project at 3554 South, 3200 West. So there was, as part of that approval, there was a development agreement that was signed and executed. And in order for any change to be made, both parties have to agree to any change. So both the council and Mr. Reynolds would need to agree to any change there. And so if the council would like to make a change, basically it would just involve directing staff to prepare those changes and then bring those forward for the council to vote on. Historically, when the council has looked at revisions, it's been through the lens of comparing what was in the original agreement versus the change and seeing if it's kind of an equal or better type scenario. That's been historically the lens of reviewing those types of changes to a development agreement. But again, if the council would like to make a change, we just would need that direction. We'll prepare the documents to make that official.
Do you mind reminding us what the changes?
So the agreement included a provision that would require finished basements. And as Mr. Reynolds pointed out, his intention was to include unfinished basements. So that was a mistake on his part. And so he would like to still have basements, just have them be finished. And as a trade-off, if you will, what he had proposed to do is include along the west and south sides of the property, a masonry wall or precast wall. So right now the agreement requires just a vinyl fence along the south and west sides because it's next to residential. Now they're already required to put in a masonry wall on the north side because that's next to commercial. So that would be an upgrade, if you will, to replace that vinyl fence with masonry. Also, he's proposing to put in some larger trees along 3200 West just to kind of improve the streetscape there.
Okay. So for this discussion, do you just kind of need a general yeah or a general no?
Exactly.
voting?
Whatever the council's pleasure is, as far as if you'd like to make a change, not make a change, we're just looking for the council's direction.
Direction? Okay. At the council meeting, it seemed pretty amenable to everyone, to a majority. But if anybody wants to give a nod or a. Is there anyone objecting to moving forward with this? Not saying you'll vote for it in a week or two, but
So we don't vote now.
No.
Correct.
You're saying
That's correct.
it'll come before us.
it's just whether or not they waste their time preparing it. And Mr. Reynolds' time.
There's no change to the square footage of the basement. It's just that it would be unfinished rather than finished.
That's correct.
And then a substitution of vinyl fencing with the mason.
Right.
Yeah, so it's a very unfinished basement, but two walls, the west side and the south side.
That's right.
Not opposed to that.
Okay. I think you can move forward with confidence.
You.
Okay, sorry about getting your name wrong.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much. Thank
No problem. Sorry, I didn't realize to do that sooner. I'll get better. All right, now we have our budget presentation. I'll turn the time over to Mr. Pyle and then Mr. Welch.
Hey, thank you, ma'am. So we'll have Jim come up and do the first part of the presentation in which he's going to talk about the current year. So 22-23, which will be finishing in June, economic conditions, how we're doing so far, kind of what that's looking like. Very reminiscent of what we would have already done in January. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of a first cut of what the budget looks like going into the new year and kind of what the next steps are from there.
Thanks, Mr. Pyle. Yes, Mayor and Council, this is traditionally what we've done in the strategic planning retreat. We're doing in the study session today, so some of it will look very familiar. It's generally an overview of where we are today, where we've been, and what we kind of expect in the current year. And so I don't know how much of exposure you've had to the current environment of the economy, both locally and nationally, but I know you've experienced it individually. So there's been a lot of inflation. The federal government has put a lot of money of stimulus into the economy that originally caused increases in
cost of housing, it caused wages to increase, caused inflation to take off. And as a result, the Federal Reserve is now trying to put reins on that horse and slow it down. So because of that, rates are going up. We're seeing that housing starts are decreasing. General production and the gross domestic product of the country is starting to slow down as expected. Consumption has started to slow down. We expect that'll eventually show up in reductions potentially in sales tax locally. Nationally, there's also the impact on inflation has been pretty dramatic. This year, I think the inflation rate, they came out in December was 6.5% over the previous year, which was 7.4%. So in the last 2 years, we've had 13% increase in general expenditures. Now, locally, that seems to feel like it's a lot more expensive than that. I know that our gas prices have continued to increase, even our commodities, as you'll see when we get into some of our individual revenues. Some people are predicting that we're either in a recession or headed towards a recession. That's evidenced usually by a couple of different measurements that they have. One of those is they look at the inversion of the yield curve, which is, do long-term bonds pay more or less than what short-term bonds do? Lately, it's been inverted. So you can actually get short-term investment products that pay a higher rate than a longer term. That's gone on for several months. That's a very classic, typical predictor of a recession. However, usually accompanying that is a decrease in the unemployment. I mean, is an increase in the unemployment rate, which we really haven't seen yet. Employers continue to employ people, wages continue to grow. And so there's this kind of dichotomy. They're fighting each other as far as whether we're in a recession or not. Some places that we looked at, for example, I mentioned Moody's in there, are actually calling it a slow session. They're creating a new term where rather than a recession, things will slow down. But I think most of the economists now saying are that if we do have any kind of a recession, it's basically going to be a slowdown of where we're currently at and a reduction of inflation. So we kind of expect that here. As you know and have our experience, Utah tends to fare better than the nation does in these times of difficulty, and our ups and downs tend to be a little bit smaller. So locally, we actually still lead the nation in unemployment at 2.2%. The nation has been about 3.4%, which is almost considered full employment. I think if you get much below 2.2%, you're employing people that really don't want to work, but they're just paying them so much that they have to. So we're still in that kind of a situation. Mind you, the information lags a couple of months, so that's as of December. Rates have moved up pretty quickly, but the current economy and the forecast are saying that rates will continue to increase, and the Federal Reserve will continue to stay that course. So locally, we expect to remain pretty strong. We've had a good year. We continue to bring in good revenues. We've been able to keep a rein on expenditures, although that's beginning to impact us on a number of different fronts. And I know Mr. Pyle will be talking about that. As a picture of where we are financially, our budget this last year, well, the one that we're currently in is about $98 million. We look at over the years, we've talked about the balance of revenues, where they come from. Right now, there's 39% of our sales taxes, 39% of our revenues coming from sales tax, 35% from property tax, and then 26% from other sources. Just for reference, if you go back 10 years, that balance was 39% was from property tax and 28% was from sales tax. So there's been a little bit of an inversion there as inflation has kicked in and property taxes haven't really kept up with the inflation. We'll look at some of the bigger revenue sources on an individual basis. This is the history of our property tax collections. This document is included in the budget book, which is published on the website, so you can always go back and look at the detail on this whenever you want to. We have included here where we expect to be projected in 2023. With property tax, we basically collect what we assess when we adopt the certified tax rate. So we expect to collect the number of dollars that we originally budgeted. That's a little bit different when we look at the sales tax projections. And we originally budgeted 30. See, they're the things, the little displays over my numbers, Eric. Is that something I can move?
You can, yeah.
Yeah, it is. Okay, there we go. All right. Makes it a little easier if I can see them. In 2023, we actually budgeted $35 million, which was somewhat of a conservative forecast because we had a great year the previous year. So far, our projections are saying we're probably going to get about $40 million this year on a budget of 38 million. So we're expecting to get about $2 million more than what we originally budgeted. That's a great year. Doesn't happen very often. It's quite an outlier. If you look at the slope of the property tax increases over the years, the previous 5 years, we averaged about 3.8% growth. Over the last 2 years, we've been averaging 6%. So as a result of the money that's been injected in the economy and the inflation that's going on, the low unemployment rate, we've benefited from that in our sales tax. Our other, one of our major sources is our utility taxes. We saw a continual decline for the last 5 or 6 years. That started to increase, and that is largely, it's made up of 4 components. And those components are the, let's see, get to the right one here. Cable TV tax, electricity, natural gas, and telecommunications. And these are basically a sales tax. So they're based on volume and they're based on rates. The difference between these is they're either set, the rates that we charge are either set by the legislature or else they're set by the Public Service Commission. So we've had a really a big increase in our revenue collections, and it's mostly due to natural gas and electricity. I think you've probably seen that in your own personal bills as your natural gas bills have gone up. I know we've seen it in the city bills. The telecommunications tax, which is basically your landlines, continues to decline. We expect to, I thought we'd hit a bottom by now, but we can't seem to get to the bottom of that. Gratefully, at this point, it's not that big of a piece of our budget. But in spite of the decreases there and cable TV, as people have moved to streaming services, electricity and natural gas has actually picked up that and carried the freight. So
Jim,
yes.
for clarification, cable TV is just the cable in the ground. If you have a dish, you're not charged sales tax,
That
correct?
is correct. There is actually a federal law that prohibits us from taxing over the air television
Is that
services.
what the streaming too? They're considering it over the air?
That's where I think I think they are. That's why we're losing it as people move from cable to this. Yes, I think you're right on the money there. Where does the money go? We are a services organization, which naturally most of it goes to salary and paying for people because it takes people to provide the services. 52% of the budget goes to public safety. So there's police is 37%, 15% fire. Then the rest goes to the other functions that we have within the city, which of course includes Parks and Rec and public services with the housing authority. That's not included in the general fund, but we also have a bunch of different other things that we do that impact the citizens. And this is kind of a general, this is the balancing number for the general fund. I always get asked what is included in non-departmental, because that one isn't very specific. And if you want the actual detail in the numbers, the best thing to do is go to the budget book, but that's where transfers to other funds are covered. It's also where the debt service that is not associated with specific function is covered, like the Utopia debt service. It includes things like the utilities for all the facilities are billed out of there. We also have the transportation tax, which is a really big thing now that we collect as a sales tax from all sales that goes directly towards roads projects. So that goes into non-departmental. So it's kind of a catch-all for everything that doesn't really belong in an individual department. And with that, that's the end of my presentation.
Hey, did anyone have any questions?
I'm happy to see the sale tax at the, now it's morning property tax. You know, it's great to see that. Which area is going to carry the most?
You mean which type of revenue?
Yeah, revenue, like last time, I can't remember, about 2 or 3 years ago, you said you can do that. You can circle a certain area, you can see that's how much.
Oh, I see. You mean, where's the sales tax coming from?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of main centers that have emerged and they're kind of obvious. There's the center around the city center in the mall, which actually does quite well. There's the heavy equipment and automobile dealers, which is a big sector for us. Mining equipment, things like that, heavy trucks. And then also there's a lot of retail down on 5600 West. That's an important place for the city also. One thing that should be noted with sales taxes, it does tend to be quite a bit more volatile. It is the most volatile of our revenues. So as the economy goes up, we benefit. As it goes down, we reap the challenges that come with that. And property tax ends up being exactly what's been budgeted each year. And we really don't see any fluctuation in that. So we have benefited now, and that's a good thing. But it's one thing to be aware of.
Have you been watching in the Redwood Road, on Redwood Road, see it's up or down for right now, the sales tax?
We do, and Redwood Road has, if you go back 20 years before, we had a lot of development in some of the others areas. That was a major portion of the income for the revenue for the city. There's still a lot of retail. There's still a lot of business that comes along Redwood Road, and it's an emerging area. I think the redevelopment agency and the community development folks have been working very hard on that, and it's starting to show benefits.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. File, you're doing the other half?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So Eric, will you pull up not the pros cons, what do they call it? First cut. There we go. Thank you. And then just the first slide. Appreciate it. Okay, kind of piggybacking on what Jim was talking about there. When you take all the revenues together from a change standpoint, we will see, or at least we're projecting to see, about a net $8 million in increase in the new budget year. So that would be 23-24. A lot of that, like Jim was talking about, is just plain inflationary or associated with inflationary effects. So let me give you an example. He talked about electricity and natural gas going up. Yeah, between the two of them, we're seeing about $2 million going up. And most of that, by the way, is already being realized in this year. So we're not making a huge projection that next year we're going to see a large leap. We're already seeing it in this year. Property tax will have a little bit. Interest is another interesting one. Usually we'll see about $400,000 a year on our investments through the PTIF, the Treasurer's Investment Fund. And because of the rate hikes that have been going on and the interest rate increases, we'll actually see that be almost $1.5 million in the new year, and are seeing a lot of that now. So we'll see about $1 million in interest there. And again, as you see the other one, court fines is up a little bit marginally, about $500,000. The big number, like Jim was talking about, is sales tax. And I wanted to concentrate on this one and give you a little more detail on the discussion. So as you all know, I think Tom just kind of alluded to it a little bit. Sales tax is the largest and it's the most volatile revenue source that we have. So it's always particularly of concern to us as to what our projection is going to be in the new year and how likely we are to see that. And here's the problem we have when we go forward with that in some sort of an uncertain or a recessionary environment, which we might be facing. We don't know for sure. Our models from a revenue projection standpoint are really good when you're increasing. They're really bad. You never see it coming when the drop off occurs. So, whether that's 18 out of 20 years or 9 out of 10 or whatever. So that means we have to take extra care in projecting how that sales tax projection is done. So in this particular year, this is how I'm approaching it. And again, this is first cut, so things could change over the next few months. But as Jim was talking about, if our sales tax projections continue the way they are through the rest of the year, and we've got 5 months of experience so far, we'll see about $5 million in increase in sales tax. We haven't seen a month yet for going back to the late spring of 2020, where we didn't meet our sales tax projection. So it's exceeded that monthly projection every month since then for 3 years. Obviously, at some point, that's going to end. We don't know when that's going to be. Like Jim talked about, there's a lot of opposing factors that are kind of talking about that go into the consideration of where that economy is going to be, how deep, if any, recession would be, and when is it going to arrive. Obviously, of course, we just don't know what that is. So what our models say from a sales tax projection standpoint is we would actually see $2 million more given current trends in the next year. That is not what I'm going to recommend. What I'm recommending is that we actually project what would be, if we stay on current trends through the current budget year, $1 million sales tax decrease, which would be about 2.5%, or would give you that $4 million I show in the graphic there. So whereas our revenues would be 11 million if we just followed the sales tax projections and kind of just went along with that, I'm projecting that we'll have $8 million revenue change, $4 million in which we'll actually budget a decrease over what we expect to see for the rest of the year by about $1 million. Again, if our trends continue the way we are, we'll see a net $5 million increase by the end of this year. And then the other increases in revenue, which are largely, like I talked about, kind of inflationary in nature, other than the court fines and the property tax, which are driven by other factors. So if we see a net $8 million in a proposed budget for the new year, what about the other side? So our first look on the expenditure side is this. We would see and recommend a wage increase of about 2.5% on the merit side and 4% on the market side. That would be $4.8 million. Our health insurance would go up about $600,000. And there's some more commentary that we'll go into later with that. Not tonight, but as to what we've done with the health insurance, where we're at with the brokers, what that's looking like. That would bring us up $5.4 million. I also would be recommending, there's different names for it, but we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and this would be really literally the first opportunity we've had to do this on a general budget standpoint for a long time. A $400,000 operational increase to parks, which would be set aside for capital replacement. And the result of that would be parks could use that money for playground replacement, for parking lot replacement. It could also be used for operational transfers if you needed to buy equipment in, say, the golf courses. It won't cover everything that we need, but it would go a long way towards covering a lot of those things that we've been bringing to you guys as program mods on a year-to-year basis. So it would definitely be a big step in that direction. And the facilities is the same thing. About $400,000 a year is what Jake spends on renovation projects between all the various buildings, carpet, paint, replacing HVAC elements, that sort of thing, which we also normally do as a program mod at the beginning of the year. And what I'm proposing here is we would put that in the general fund at about $400,000. So that's about $800,000. Also, just going through the first cut of the program mods, I would recommend another $800,000 in increases for things like utility increases, which again, along with inflation, we know we're going to have. There's some overtime costs that we have not been able to fund in the past. There's a Victims Advocate grant that's expiring. I'm just listing these things. There's a bunch of they're not large things, but when you total them all up, they come to about that figure. And that won't be the final figure. Like I say, that's just the first cut through what the program mod list looked like. In total, therefore, you would have about $7 million, is that right? 4 or 5.5. Yeah, almost 7, which would leave you actually still $1 million for any other contingencies that might come up. That's why I put the other little graphic on there, the unknown. So if the economy could go south and quicker, and we have to come back and modify this proposal. There are legislative things, as you heard Lincoln talk about, that could cost us kind of an unfunded mandate standpoint, imposed cost on us from the state. All of our other enterprise and service funds are actually doing really pretty well. The theater and the cultural center are not. We're gonna have to come back and talk to you about what you want to do with that. So that could be a cost that we need to take care of or handle in a different way, and we'll bring that to you back at a later date as well. But the point I wanted to make there was, yeah, I mean, it's the first cut. Looks really good so far. The economy's been really great. And we would be well within our revenue increases to take care of some of these concerns. And next steps. So as you know, Jim does his presentation normally in January, so we're doing that tonight. I would normally have this calculation for you around that same time, or maybe a little bit later. We're a little earlier in our process than what we normally are. By the beginning of March. Is that right? Beginning of March, middle of March, we'd like to have at least a first cut draft where the numbers actually balance out for you to consider and just to see and ask questions about detail of what that looks like. So that would be the next step probably before you. Other than we will have other discussions about capital expenditures. I know that's on your agenda as well, and we're preparing for that. And then the tentative budget approval would come in May. So we're kind of on a normal schedule. Looks pretty good from an overall standpoint. And I think we are hedging appropriately and of course, we'll also watch over the coming months. If we do start to see dips or drops in the economy, then we'll factor that in as well. And that's all I have, ma'am.
Okay. Any questions or comments for Mr. Pyle?
Page 2 of your presentation, your slide says CIP fund balance is 9 million, including already committed projects. What is it not including?
It wouldn't include anything that we would be bringing for you or to you on a proposed, like you were asking for a capital expenditure list. So I don't have anything in that off the top of my head right now as far as stuff, but well, actually, no,
We
that's
have 9 million in there that's not allocated to anywhere, not committed anywhere.
exactly.
Okay. All right.
I did forget the one thing in my projection there. I did not include the fleet in that, so that would be 1.25 million that we would come and include in that as a proposal for the new year for 2024.
Just a comment on the wage increase that you suggested. I think I would be supportive of the merit increase. But just what I'm seeing, in the private sector and serving on other boards of other organizations, we saw a lot of increases that coincided with inflation in 2022. What you suggested just now seemed like another pretty healthy increase. Any justification behind that?
Sure, yeah, and really what we're looking at there, and we haven't seen a lot of numbers coming out of other cities yet, so I will stipulate to that. It plus the merit increase would keep up with inflation and close to keep up with inflation, which is what we're trying to do in terms of keeping our staff stable. Certainly as those other numbers come in from other cities, we would look at that. We don't see 4% as being out of line with the municipal market from the early numbers we are hearing or seeing. So, but again, it's early, it's preliminary. It's nothing that is set in stone, I guess would be the way to put it.
I think it would be helpful, and nothing against what Jim presented. It was helpful. But just to get a little more color on the tea leaves and what's happening with the economy, if we once a year when we make these decisions, had an economist come in to drill down a little bit further, maybe into this demographics of our city and also beyond that,
Yeah.
statewide and nationally, what could be coming down the pipe and
Sure. Yeah, the interesting comment. We never considered doing that before. I certainly think that'd be great. I don't know how much any economist is going to be able to drill down particularly to our locality, but certainly at the state level, they have a lot of visibility. I'm not, and Jim mentioned this before, and we do see this every year. I'm not really sure that the national level usually, even in a recessionary environment, reflects what ends up happening in Utah. What the biggest indicator for us is, like I said before, is where our sales taxes go. So we watch really early to see if there are any of those sectors that are dropping or being affected and that sort of thing. And then act accordingly from there.
Okay, seeing no other comments, thank you so much. We'll move on to the council calendar. Did anybody have any issues or concerns? None. Sweet. Okay, our next one, potential future agenda items. The stop sign tickets. I gave everybody, I think I sent everybody the email or the text or whatever about an officer being over in a specific area. Or let's see, let me think I might think this. 5480 west and 2400 south. There's a police officer there. Exact same time from 6 to 7:30, 3 days a week. People are rolling through stop signs, so he's giving them tickets. You can all guess what my first response was, but they're feeling like it's a targeted revenue source. So I asked staff if they would give us a report of that time of morning, if it's a big issue with accidents or what it is during the day, so I can tell the residents, this is why we're so concerned at this intersection. Because I haven't just got one, I've gotten many, and I do literally say, stop sign means stop, but you got outside.
Is that
Did you have a chance
residential
to?
neighborhood, or is that coming off of a feeder road, or where's that?
So it's coming off 56. Do you know where the gas station Charlie's is?
Yeah.
So it's this road north of Charlie's.
Okay.
And then it goes to a business park. So there's the Mercedes vans, I don't know what they're called anymore. And then a trucking company, Codell is down a bit. There's another trucking company on the corner. You know, it's all just that bigger industrial. And it's those hardworking folks that are complaining to me. So, Right.
We did,
okay,
yes.
so I
And-
asked staff to give us a report of what the,
Right.
situation
activities
was.
then. I don't have any information on the accidents, and in fact, it might be more appropriate to let the chief speak to it, but we were also getting complaints on the other side of that coin, and that's why, as I understand it, at least we were out there, we were getting,
so do we know who was
Commercial.
complaining?
I believe we do, yes.
Okay,
Comes from our business retention specialist who's out there working with the businesses all the time. They were making contacts with him. And he had both sides of that as well. I think he was also contacted by some of the same people that are talking to you.
oh,
Mayor.
that's interesting that they
Yeah, I
found
think.
him.
Sounded
Yeah.
like.
I don't know.
Anyway, so we did get some information on how often we've been out there, what they're doing. The chief went out there and looked at the intersection herself. I happened to do the same thing. I was out with Dan Johnson, looking at some construction projects and went and looked, and yep, sure enough, people are definitely rolling through the four-way stop, no question about that. But chief, maybe I can have you talk about those stats. I was trying to find what you sent for me and I couldn't find it here. Do you have that handy?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Of course, now I just came up with it. Yeah. I actually did just find it. It was Thursday. Yeah.
Yeah, so we've been out there on 5 different days.
Do you mind coming up to the mic
Oh, yeah.
up here? Just for Zoom and presentation and everything else.
That's like,
Sorry, we can see.
Yes, Colleen Jacobs, Chief of Police. Yes, we have been out at that intersection 5 different times over the past 3 months, and we have cited or warned 75 vehicles.
Okay, so only 5 times?
Yeah.
Boy. Okay. They sound like it's much more than that,
They probably got a ticket.
possibly.
The intersection itself, Eric, how quick can you zip? It is a 4-way stop. It's a really wide intersection. It's got the east, west, north, south, and turn lanes. So you've got potentially, 12 vehicles there at the same time. And it's also an area where there's a lot of semi-truck traffic in addition to passenger vehicle traffic. And quite frankly, running stop signs is dangerous. If they're rolling through them, then they're not taking the time to properly look in all directions in all of those lanes to make sure vehicles aren't actually coming.
So which one is stop sign?
It's that one here. Yep.
Right there.
Yeah, that's a dirt patch, but there's really something there now.
And it's a fairly busy intersection at all times of day. I don't know what the determination is for traffic signals or anything, but I don't know that there's enough traffic to warrant that, but it is fairly busy. Semi trucks and passenger cars.
So in Lake Park, we have roundabouts on this same street. So I guess Public Works would have to see if there's anything else that would be more conducive to the neighborhood. But the accident rate was quite high before we started.
I didn't request any information on accident rate, just on the citation and warning stop information.
Okay, do you mind getting the accident? That's a lot easier for me to say, there's accidents, and this is why.
Yep.
Because just a stop sign means stop doesn't seem to be an answer.
Right. Any other questions on this?
Anybody else?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So is anybody interested in looking at changing to a light or a roundabout, or should we just encourage people to stop?
Change to a yield. I'm just
Yeah.
kidding. I'm kidding.
I'll take any time. Totally open.
I mean, that's what they're doing. They're just yielding and
Yes.
rolling through, but. Yeah.
I think you should keep telling them to stop.
Stop means stop, right? Okay,
That'll fix their problem.
I just have we talk about photocop,
mhm,
and photocop hasn't been here in a long time, but we went to England a year ago, and photocop is big in England. And my son, who lived there for 2 years, he's like, Dad, don't drive there, don't do this. I came home, I'm like, we're okay. 2 tickets later in the mail.
they found you over the pond, huh?
You have an extradition treaty with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty reasonable, but. Yeah, so photocop works, and I'm actually in favor of it,
So am I.
even with the
But-
tickets that I'll probably get.
Sounds good. All right, council reports. Does anybody have anything? All right, I'm not gonna tell you about all my meetings, but Utah League of Cities and Towns. So Will and Scott and myself will be the 3 members on that.
Oh, okay.
So whoever needs to know that, it's out there. Okay, and then,
Sorry, we asked, so they had asked for 2, usually have 1 staff, and then they have an alternate elected. Is that how you wanted to do it, or did you want to do it
No,
a
they-
different way?
he said, I thought it said 3 elected and 1 alternate staff.
I can't remember.
So,
That's
Cool.
great. Yep, it can be however we want.
Okay.
That's great.
All right.
okay,
Do you know who you want to list as the alternate, just so I can
Probably Lincoln or Nicole, because they go to the staff
Should be
part of the
Lincoln.
meetings anyway.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah, I think that works for their setup too.
Yeah, because they're at 90% of all the other support meetings. So. Okay, and then there's nothing under strategic discussion, right? There's no line item. Nobody needs anything. Okay, and looks like the last thing is a motion for a closed session for quarterly pending litigation update. Okay. I need somebody to make the motion.
So moved.
Motion to close this meeting.
Yes, and have a,
Move to close session.
sorry, for quarterly pending litigation update.
And when we're finished with that, we will end and be done.
Correct.
You say that okay, Eric?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't really,
Just need a second.
Say it all.
Right?
yeah. So is that your second?
No, that's my first.
Second.
Oh. Okay, all in, well, no, you do the roll call, sorry.
Councilman Nordfelt,
Yes.
Councilman Christensen,
Yes.
Councilman Hune,
Yes.
Councilman Harmon, Councilman Whitstone,
Yes.
Councilman Fitzie Umanu.
Aye.
Mayor Ling.
Yes.
Section.
You're still- you're not muted, Dawn.
You know.
There we go. All right, so we will end this meeting immediately after the other, and only the legislature legal will be the only thing.